Reddit. What is your most disturbing, scary or creepy real story series? Adam Gent. Not so much as scary, but creepy as shit. Around 2007, my son and I were walking about through the woods. He was about 5 at the time. While we were walking, he told me he wanted to show me something. Amusing him, I just told him to show me, and he started to lead me down this trail. I had been in these woods many of times, but never went down this trail because I remembered it being a dead end. Well, after following him down this trail, it led to a dilapidated house, shack. Keep in mind, my son is 5 and definitely hasn't been down in these woods before. I asked him how he knew how there was a house here, and he said it was where him and his buddy Tom, imaginary friend, come and hang out when Tom can't sleep. I was gonna go inside, but my son told me not to worry about trying, that Tom blocks the door with things so nobody can steal his stuff. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't open but like an inch because something was in the way. I still think about it and have asked him about Tom's house, but he claims he got sick and had to leave. I'd go back, but now the woods have been clear-cut for an Kroger. Plain_dude. When I was about 12, I stayed up late watching an old X-File episode, the one where the guy has cockroaches crawling under his skin. Anyway, I went to bed during a bit of a storm at around midnight. I began to have these intense alien abduction dreams. At one point, I'm on an abduction table with the grey things looking over me with intense white light. Then out of nowhere I woke up in my bed to a huge bang and intense light still filtering down throughout the house. The light was more intense outside, so I walked out to the balcony. We live in a 2-story house, and walked outside to see that my neighbor's paperbark tree had been split down the middle of it with what I presume was lighting. There were glowing embers of paper bark floating everywhere. TLDR, aliens might have transported me back to Earth via a lightning strike after abduction. Cheeky buffalo. When I was 10 years old, my friend was spending the night in my room. We had 2 radios playing at either end of my room, our early version of surround sound. IDK, we were young. We went downstairs, my room is a loft, to go brush our teeth. When we came back upstairs, both of the radios were just playing static. I walked to the radio closest to the door, and the static was suddenly interrupted by a deep voice that growled, "Don't you dare touch that dial." After this complete static, for the rest of the night, we ended up sleeping downstairs. Armandar. When we were seniors in high school, my idiot friends used to like to follow people in our cars. We were at a local supermarket and chose to follow this one car. We followed it all the way to the next town over, through random back streets, and he finally loses us. We start creeping down this one street, and a 20-ish-year-old man starts walking from the driveway with a shotgun pointed at our car. Moral of the story: don't be a teenage idiot. Deleted user. My junior year of college, I moved into a large house with 4 people on the first floor, 5 on the second, and 2 people upstairs who we didn't really talk to. The house was very old but seemed normal enough, until I went down to the basement for the first time. There was a washing machine and dryer that never worked, so we had no real reason to ever go down there except for parties. The weird part was this room towards the back of the basement that was always locked, and just gave me an overwhelming sense of fear anytime I was down there. Well, apparently when my roommates first moved in, that room wasn't locked. One of the girls was looking around and found several human teeth and what she described as strange tools. Not long after that, the landlord, who had only recently purchased the house, locked the door and it was never opened again. Fast forward a few months. I had recently woken up from a nap and was cooking some food on the stove, and I was the only person on our floor. Suddenly, the hallway light to my left turns off, and I just shrugged it off, assuming the light had burnt out. Then it turned back on. The light switch for that light is in the stairwell on the other side of a closed door, so I waited a minute and the light turned off again. I quickly ran over to the door and opened it, thinking someone had to be fucking with me or something. No one there. I walked downstairs and there was nobody on that floor either. Now I'm a little freaked out, but still just tell myself it must be an electrical problem. So I go back to my food. Immediately the light goes on and off again. I just kinda stood there for a few seconds. Then the music started. It was coming from the living room, which is right next to the kitchen. Now I'm feeling relieved, thinking that someone is home after all. Walk into the living room. There is a closed laptop sitting on a ledge near the window connected to some speakers, and the television was on one of those static channels just like in the fucking movies. I slowly walked towards the speakers when I realized the laptop wasn't even fucking on. I unplugged the speakers and the music stopped. I really wish I could remember what song it was, but I had other thoughts on my mind at that point. That was when the chill sunk in. I turned off the stove, walked down the stairs, got in my car, and drove the fuck away. A few weeks later I told my roommates what had happened, hoping that someone would confess to the very elaborate prank they had pulled. Instead, everyone got kinda quiet, and one by one they each started admitting weird shit that had happened to them. One of the girls said she would often wake up in the middle of the night and she would often hear noises coming from her closet, and sometimes the hangers would be moving like something had just bumped them. Another friend said that he often heard noises, like footsteps above him, but when he walked upstairs nobody was home. Another guy told us he had woken up in the middle of the night to see a dark figure standing in the middle of our kitchen, just staring into his room before it walked back towards the stairwell. Pooch 217. A little late to the thread, so this might not get many reads, but I'll post it anyways. So when I was 7 or 8, I went over to a friend's house after school. My friend's house was located on a relatively quiet street and had a large backyard surrounded by woods. My friend and I decided it'd be a good day to build a tree fort we'd in the woods behind his house. We rounded up the necessary tools and brought his little brother to tag along. Some background to the story: there had recently been some daytime coyote spotting in the area, so we were nervous to begin with. I can remember discussing, with my friend and his younger brother, our plan to smash any attacking coyotes with a hammer. In retrospect, probably would not have worked at all, but like I said, we were little kids. As we were walking along the path out into the woods, I can vividly remember looking down at the trail while walking and conversing with my friend, when all of a sudden my friend's younger brother stopped dead in his tracks and remained there motionless. Before I really knew what was going on, my friend also stopped suddenly, so naturally I did the same and looked up to see what was frightening them. I can still, very clearly, remember the image. There was an older woman, I'd guess mid-late 70s if I had to say an age, with waving curly grayish-white hair, dressed in a white gown roughly 25 yards ahead of us in the woods. She wasn't moving, she was just standing there, completely motionless, not looking at us, but rather through us, if that makes sense. I get chills just thinking of it now, but the image is still so clear in my mind. What I'm about to say next seems like a bit of a stretch, and it was more than likely my imagination getting the better of me. However, there was a faint aura of white-like around the women. My friends and I have since discussed the incident, and they too described the light. After standing paralyzed for what seemed like several moments, we watched as the women slowly raised her right arm and pointed in the direction from which we'd come. Almost immediately, and like a scene from a movie, we all screamed, dropping our tools, nails, and pieces of wood for the treehouse as we sprinted back towards my friend's house. We frantically told my friend's mom what we'd seen, and to no one's surprise, she dismissed it as childhood imagination. We're now all over 20 years old, and we are still in agreement that we saw a glowing, white-haired woman dressed in a white gown in the middle of the woods who pointed at us. Slater. My cousin, Jay, and his wife, A, had a bad stretch in their lives and had to move in with some relatives. Her uncles flipped houses professionally and had recently purchased some cheap property in an old suburb of Toronto. This one gives me chills because they are very reasonable, not superstitious people. I didn't believe it at first, but my cousin is a big strong guy, heavy engine mechanic, and he seemed terrified after he told me this, so I don't know what to believe. It was a rundown piece of shit, but it had an extra bedroom and heating. So J and A moved in and lived on the ground floor with their 2 cats. Things were pretty normal for 4 months, until the uncles decided to rescue 2 more cats, bringing the total to 4. It was light at first, they'd hear weird noises at night sometimes, and things would go missing, jewelry and the like, but they would pop up. Jay is kinda absent-minded, so it's not unlike him to move shit and forget about it. However, Things started to escalate in the weird department shortly after the 2 new cats were brought in. The cats would gather in a semicircle and hiss at the door to the basement. One time they started yowling so loud it woke people up, but they all scattered with J and A went to check it out. The cats would do this at night regularly after a while, hissing, yowling at the basement door late at night. They thought maybe rats were in basement, so the uncles called in an exterminator and they laid down poison traps. After the exterminator finished his work, he made a comment about keeping the cats out of the basement, but all 4 of them realized that despite the door being open, sometimes they never recalled seeing the cats cross the basement threshold, let alone in the basement itself. Shortly after this, maybe after 6 months of living in the house, J and A had one final incident that made them move out of the house. A was downstairs doing the dishes and J, upstairs, helping the uncles install some new shelves. She heard J walk then break onto a full run down the stairs toward the basement door. He then slammed the door behind him with such force that the noise made her drop a dish and break it. A yelled at J for being a lumbering buffoon and scaring her. Then about 20 seconds later J came down to the same set of stairs and asked if A had fell down or something because her and the uncles heard all the commotion downstairs. When A realized that J was upstairs the whole time, her blood ran ice cold. She then proceeded to tell J that someone had ran down the stairs and slammed the door shut. The uncles and J went to check out the basement and found no one was there. Anyway, they moved out maybe a week or 2 later. The uncles didn't last much longer. They sold the property to a development. But now there's a Tim Horton, Wendy's, Subway built on the old site. A few years later, A was telling one of her coworkers at a new job about what happened. The girl she told asked where about the house was located. Apparently the girl grew up in that suburb, and the house was famous. An old woman had lived there alone with her cats for years. They found her dead one day in the basement. She had killed herself and the cats had eaten parts of her. The kids used to dare each other to sneak peek into the basement window.